I was sitting in that same beige conference room where they'd crushed my dreams 11 times before. The wall still had those motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. Miriam Caro sat across from me with that fake smile she always wore when delivering bad news. The folder in her hands was thin, too thin for good news. "Julian," she said, sliding it across the mahogany table, "we've made our decision about the director position." I already knew. The same way you know it's going to rain when the air gets heavy. I'd spent 3 months preparing for this moment. 3 months working 16-hour days, building financial models that saved Caldwell and Associates millions. 3 months believing that this time would be different. Inside the folder was a single page. Damien Locke's name at the top. The same Damien I'd mentored when he started 2 years ago. The same Damien who still called me for help with basic Excel formulas. "Damien brings fresh energy to the role," Miriam continued, her voice like broken glass wrapped in silk. I nodded slowly, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, something sharper, something that would change everything. That night, I found myself standing at the harbor, watching the lights flicker across Boston's skyline. The wind cut through my jacket, but I didn't move. I needed the cold to wake me up from whatever dream I'd been living. 12 years at Caldwell and Associates. 12 years of being the guy they called at midnight when everything fell apart. 12 years of fixing other people's mistakes while they climbed the ladder I helped build. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Amy. "How did it go?" I stared at the message for 5 minutes before typing back, "Next time." But standing there, watching the harbor lights dance like broken promises, I knew there wouldn't be a next time. Not the way I'd been playing the game. The rules were rigged, and I'd been too stupid to see it. A seagull landed on the railing beside me, tilted its head, and flew away. Even it knew better than to stick around where it wasn't wanted. I walked back to my car, something hard and cold forming in my mind like ice. The first rejection came in 2009. I was 28, fresh-faced, and believed merit mattered. The partner position went to someone's nephew. "You need more client experience," they said. So I got client experience. Built relationships. Saved accounts. The second rejection came in 2011. "Leadership skills," they said. So I led teams, trained new hires, mentored junior associates. Third rejection. Industry visibility. Fourth, strategic thinking. Fifth, presentation skills. Each time, I checked their boxes. Each time, they moved the goalposts. By 2015, I stopped counting the reasons. Started counting the rejections instead. 6, 7, 8. Each one going to someone younger, louder, or better connected. Number 9 went to a woman who'd been there 6 months. 10 went to a guy who played golf with the senior partners. 11 went to Miriam's college roommate's son. Now 12. Damien Locke, the man I'd literally taught how to read financial statements. Sitting at my desk the morning after, I opened a new spreadsheet. Not for Caldwell. For me. In the first column, I typed rejection number 12, Damien Locke. Then I started documenting everything else. The next Monday, Miriam called me into her corner office. The one that should have been mine 3 promotions ago. She gestured to the leather chair across from her desk like she was doing me a favor. "Julian, I want to address the elephant in the room," she said, adjusting her designer glasses. "I know you're disappointed about the director role." Disappointed. Like I'd missed a bus instead of watching my career get stolen again. "The truth is," she continued, leaning forward like we were conspirators, "you lack charisma. Leadership isn't just about being smart. It's about inspiring people." I nodded, keeping my face blank while fury burned in my chest. This was the same woman who'd used my financial analysis word for word in last month's board presentation. The same woman who forwarded my strategic memos to clients with her name on top. "But don't worry," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You're invaluable to us exactly where you are. The backbone of our operations." Backbone. Translation. Too useful to promote, too dangerous to fire. I thanked her for the feedback and walked back to my desk. That afternoon, I started my second spreadsheet. This one was titled Miriam's Dependencies. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. I was reviewing quarterly reports when I heard laughter from the break room. Owen Drake, our newest junior associate, was showing off a promotion letter to anyone who'd listen. 9 months. The kid had been there 9 months and was already moving up to senior associate. I'd ghostwritten his first client presentation because he couldn't tell a profit margin from a pizza menu. It's all about bringing fresh perspectives, Owen was saying, his voice carrying that confident ignorance only the young possess. Sometimes experience can hold you back, you know? I stood in the doorway, invisible as always, watching him wave around the promotion I'd been chasing for 14 years. The promotion that skipped over me like I was furniture. That night, I stopped at an office supply store and bought a black leather notebook. Not a computer file this time. Something physical. Something permanent. At home, I opened it to the first page and wrote at the top, the map. Below that, I started drawing. Not pictures. Networks. Dependencies. The invisible web that held Caldwell and Associates together. The web that ran through me. I worked on the ledger every night for 2 weeks. Client passwords that only I knew. Server access codes they'd given me for emergencies. Vendor relationships I'd built over years of late-night phone calls and problem-solving. The more I documented, the clearer the picture became. Caldwell wasn't just a consulting firm. It was a machine, and I was the oil that kept it running. Remove me, and everything would grind to a halt. I drew arrows connecting clients to projects. Projects to systems. Systems to me. Always back to me. The Morrison Industries account that I'd saved 3 times. The quarterly compliance reports that I'd automated but never shared the code for. The backup payment systems that I'd set up during the 2020 crisis. By page 50, I had something beautiful and terrifying. A complete map of how the company actually worked versus how they thought it worked. A gap so wide you could drive a truck through it. I closed the ledger and smiled for the first time in weeks. They thought they owned me. They had no idea I owned them. The web was more intricate than I'd first realized. Every critical function at Caldwell had my fingerprints on it. Not because I planned it that way. Because I was the person who fixed things when they broke. The client database that crashed every month? I'd built the workaround that kept it running. The financial modeling software that nobody else understood? I'd customized every formula. The vendor payment system that saved us millions in late fees? My design. I sketched it all out like a spider's web, with me at the center. Each line represented a dependency. Each circle represented a failure point. Each arrow showed what would happen when I wasn't there to catch the falling pieces. The beautiful thing about being underestimated is that people stop watching what you do. They assume you're harmless. They give you access to everything because Julian will handle it. Miriam's computer password was Success 2023. She'd asked me to update her files so many times I could log in with my eyes closed. The senior partners' meeting minutes landed in my inbox because I was the one who compiled their monthly reports. I wasn't just documenting dependencies. I was mapping power. Real power. 3 months after Damien's promotion, Caldwell threw its annual rooftop party. The entire Boston office crammed onto the 42nd floor terrace, pretending we were a family instead of a collection of people competing for scraps. I stood near the railing, nursing a whiskey and watching the city lights blur below. The ledger sat heavy in my briefcase, like a loaded weapon waiting to be used. Ladies and gentlemen, Miriam's voice cut through the chatter. She stood on the makeshift stage, microphone in one hand, champagne in the other. I want to toast our rising stars. The future of Caldwell and Associates. She called Owen Drake forward. The kid beamed like he'd won the lottery instead of a job he was barely qualified for. Owen represents everything we value, Miriam continued. Innovation, charisma, leadership potential. The crowd applauded. I raised my glass along with everyone else, feeling the weight of 12 rejections settle in my chest like stones. To Owen, Miriam said, and to all our young leaders who remind us why fresh blood is so vital to our success. I drank to that, because in 6 months, they'd discover exactly how vital I was. And by then, it would be too late. The first test came on a Tuesday morning in November. I let one invoice from our office supply vendor slip through the cracks. Just a small thing, $500 for printer paper and toner. By 10 a.m., the phones were ringing. Accounting couldn't reconcile their monthly reports. The vendor was threatening to suspend service. 3 different department heads were demanding answers. I waited exactly 10 minutes before walking into the chaos. Julian, thank God, said Patricia from accounting, her usually perfect hair disheveled. The Henley Industries invoice is causing system errors. Everything's frozen. I sat down at her computer, typed a few commands, and watched the error messages disappear. The whole fix took 90 seconds. How did you know how to do that? Patricia asked, relief flooding her voice. I shrugged. Lucky guess. But it wasn't luck. I'd built that workaround 2 years ago when the accounting software first started having integration issues. I was the only person who knew it existed. In my ledger that night, I made a red checkmark next to invoice processing dependencies. The reaction had been immediate and panic-inducing. Perfect. The second test was more ambitious. I delayed submitting one financial model to our biggest client, Hartwell Corporation, by exactly 4 hours. Not enough to miss the deadline. Just enough to see what happened when I wasn't there to catch every falling ball. The phone call started at 2 p.m., first from Owen, then from Damien, then from Miriam herself. Julian, where's the Hartwell projection? Miriam's voice was tight with stress. Working on final revisions, I said calmly. Should be ready by 5. 5. The presentation is at 6. Plenty of time, I assured her. What I didn't tell her was that the model was finished. Had been finished since Monday. But nobody else could read the formulas I'd used. The calculations were correct, but I'd written them in a way that only made sense to me. At 4:45, I submitted the model. At 5:30, Owen called in a panic because the client had questions about the methodology. Questions only I could answer. I walked into the conference room 5 minutes before the presentation, answered 3 technical questions, and watched the client nod with satisfaction. Afterward, Miriam pulled me aside. What would we do without you, Julian? I smiled. Hopefully, you'll never have to find out. The warning came from an unexpected source. Cara Williams from HR knocked on my cubicle wall on a Thursday afternoon, looking around nervously like she was about to commit treason. Julian, can we talk? Somewhere private. We ended up in the rarely used conference room on the 38th floor. Cara closed the door and sat across from me, her fingers drumming on the table. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, she said, but I like you. You've always been straight with me. I waited. In my experience, the most important information came from people who probably shouldn't be sharing it. They're never going to promote you, she said finally. Miriam told me directly. You're too useful where you are. Too embedded in the daily operations. The words hit like a punch, even though I'd suspected it for years. Hearing it confirmed was different. Final. She said promoting you would be like promoting the foundation of a building. Critical to have, impossible to move. I thanked Cara and walked back to my desk in a daze. That night, I added a new section to my ledger. Executive intentions. Under it, I wrote Cara's exact words. Then I started planning in earnest. The ledger grew fatter every week. I documented everything now. Not just systems and passwords, but conversations, decisions, and the hidden connections that made Caldwell function. Miriam's private calendar, which she'd given me access to so I could schedule her client calls. The board meeting minutes that landed in my inbox because I prepared the financial summaries. The compliance schedules that only I understood because I'd written them. I added vendor contact information that lived only in my head. Client preferences that I'd learned through years of relationship building. System quirks that I'd never documented for anyone else. The beautiful part was how invisible it all was. They saw me as Julian, the reliable guy who kept the lights on. They never saw me as Julian, the man who controlled the power grid. I started carrying the ledger everywhere. To meetings, to client dinners, even to the rooftop where I'd eat lunch and sketch new connections. It became my Bible, my roadmap, my weapon. By December, I had over 200 pages of institutional knowledge that existed nowhere else. 200 pages of reasons why Caldwell needed me more than they'd ever realized. The question wasn't whether I had power. The question was when I'd use it. The humiliation came during our January board presentation. I'd spent weeks building a revolutionary financial model for our expansion into the West Coast market. It was elegant, thorough, and completely my work. I sat in the back of the boardroom, watching Miriam present my analysis to the senior partners. She clicked through slides that I'd created, explained concepts that I'd developed, and answered questions using arguments that I'd written. This innovative approach, she said, gesturing at my work, represents the kind of forward thinking that Owen brings to our team. Owen. She was crediting my model to Owen Drake, who couldn't build a financial projection if his life depended on it. But something interesting happened. James Hartwell, our biggest client, frowned and looked confused. He'd worked with me directly on this project. He knew whose brain had created these numbers. After the presentation, Hartwell approached me in the hallway. "Excellent work on the West Coast analysis, Julian," he said quietly. "Your modeling is always brilliant." I thanked him, but I also made a mental note. Hartwell knew where the real value came from. That would be important later. In my ledger that night, I added Hartwell's name to a new section, Allied Assets. 2 weeks later, I put the first real test into motion. I skipped our weekly strategy meeting. Just didn't show up. Sent no explanation, no apology. The meeting was supposed to cover the Morrison Industries renewal, our second biggest account. Owen was presenting the retention strategy I'd written for him. My phone started buzzing at 3 p.m. "Julian, where are you?" Owen's voice was tight with panic. "Doctor's appointment," I lied. "Everything okay?" "The Morrison presentation. They're asking technical questions about the financial projections. Questions I can't answer." Of course he couldn't. He hadn't built them. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said helpfully. An hour later, Miriam called. "Julian, we need you here immediately. The Morrison meeting is falling apart." I arrived just as Owen was stammering through an explanation of revenue recognition that would have made a first-year accounting student cringe. The Morrison executives looked confused and annoyed. "Sorry I'm late," I said, sliding into the conference room. "Medical emergency." I spent the next 30 minutes rescuing the presentation, answering every technical question, and rebuilding the client's confidence. But I let Owen's failures sink in first. Let them see what happened when I wasn't there to catch the falling pieces. That Friday, I met my old colleague Pierce Henderson at a bar near the seaport. We'd started at Caldwell the same year, but he'd left 5 years ago for a smaller firm. Now he ran his own practice. "You look like hell," he said, raising his whiskey. 12 rejections will do that to you," I replied. Pierce shook his head. "Julian, you're the smartest analyst in Boston. Why are you still there?" I stared out at the harbor lights, thinking about the ledger in my briefcase. About 200 pages of institutional knowledge and hidden dependencies. "I'm building something," I said finally. "Building what?" "The one thing they can't promote away from me." Pierce studied my face in the dim bar light. "That sounds dangerous." "Only to them." We drank in silence for a while, watching boats navigate the dark water. Pierce was right to be concerned. What I was planning would change everything. But after 12 rejections and 14 years of being treated like furniture, I was ready for everything to change. "Whatever you're planning," Pierce said as we parted ways, "be careful. And if you ever want to talk about other opportunities." I tucked his business card into my wallet. Another name for the Allied Assets section. By March, my ledger had grown to 250 pages. But one account dominated my attention more than any other. I drew a red circle around it on page 43, Whitmore Financial. They weren't our biggest client by revenue, but they were our most critical. Whitmore had been with Caldwell for 8 years. Their contract renewal was worth $12 million annually, and their satisfaction scores determined our industry reputation. More importantly, Whitmore's CEO, Victoria Chong, trusted me completely. I'd saved their compliance audit 3 times, restructured their entire financial reporting system, and personally managed their transition through 2 major regulatory changes. Victoria called me directly when she had problems. Not the main Caldwell number. My personal cell phone. In the ledger, I documented every touchpoint with Whitmore. Every custom solution I'd built for them. Every crisis I'd resolved. Every reason they stayed with Caldwell instead of switching to a competitor. The red circle represented more than just revenue. It represented the keystone of our entire client base. Remove Whitmore, and other clients would follow. Their departure would trigger a cascade of doubts about Caldwell's capabilities. I closed the ledger and smiled. In chess, you don't have to capture the king immediately. You just have to control the center of the board. Whitmore Financial was the center of Caldwell's board. The setup came in April, delivered with Miriam's usual fake sweetness. She called me into her office on a Tuesday morning, gesturing toward the chair that I'd sat in for 12 rejections. "Julian, I need you to do something important," she said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Owen is ready for more responsibility. I want you to prepare him to manage the Whitmore account." My heart jumped, but I kept my expression neutral. "Whitmore? That's our most complex client relationship. Exactly why I need you to train him. Your expertise is fresh energy. It's perfect, perfect." She was handing me the rope to hang them with. "Of course," I said. "Happy to help." Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted training sessions with Owen. I showed him Whitmore's systems, explained their compliance requirements, and walked him through their reporting preferences. What I didn't tell him were the unwritten rules. Victoria Chang's pet peeves. The informal communication style she preferred. The historical context behind every process. The tribal knowledge that took years to accumulate. I gave him information. I didn't give him understanding. On the ledger's final pages, I started a countdown calendar. 30 days until Owen would face Victoria Chang alone. 30 days until Caldwell learned the difference between data and wisdom. The dinner meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at Neptune's, an upscale restaurant overlooking the harbor. Victoria Chang flew in from New York specifically to discuss Whitmore's contract renewal with Owen. I sat 3 tables away, allegedly dining alone, but actually monitoring every moment of Owen's career suicide. Victoria was gracious at first. She'd worked with Caldwell long enough to give new faces the benefit of doubt. But within 20 minutes, Owen had made 3 critical mistakes. He pitched services Whitmore had explicitly rejected 2 years ago. He misunderstood their compliance timeline. Most damaging, he suggested changes to their reporting structure that would have cost them millions in regulatory penalties. From my corner table, I watched Victoria's expression shift from polite attention to concerned confusion to barely controlled irritation. Owen's voice grew louder as he sensed the meeting slipping away. He started name-dropping senior partners, making promises about resources he couldn't deliver, offering discounts he wasn't authorized to give. Victoria excused herself and walked to the bathroom. On the way, she stopped at my table. "Julian, thank God you're here. Can you explain what your colleague is talking about? None of this makes sense." I rescued the meeting just enough to prevent immediate disaster. Smoothed over Owen's mistakes. Realigned the conversation with Whitmore's actual needs. But I didn't save it completely. I let Victoria leave with doubts. The weekend of May 15th, I turned off my phone. For the first time in 14 years, I ignored the system alerts, missed the emergency calls, and let Caldwell fend for itself. Saturday morning, I drove to the Cape and sat on the beach, listening to waves instead of crisis management. The breakdown started at 6 p.m. Friday. The automated backup system that I jury-rigged 3 years ago finally collapsed. Client files disappeared. Financial models corrupted. The main database locked everyone out. By Saturday afternoon, half the office was working frantically to restore systems they didn't understand. By Sunday, they were calling external IT consultants who charged premium rates and delivered minimal results. I returned home Sunday evening to 47 missed calls and 62 increasingly desperate text messages. Monday morning, I strolled into the office at my usual time, coffee in hand, acting like nothing had happened. "Julian." Miriam practically sprinted across the lobby. "Thank God. Everything's been crashing since Friday. The whole system is down." I sat at my desk, logged into my computer, and started typing. 20 minutes later, everything was working perfectly. "How did you fix it so fast?" asked Patricia from accounting. I shrugged. "I rebuilt that system a while ago. Sometimes old code just needs refreshing." The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in June. Victoria Chang's name appeared on my personal cell, not the main Caldwell line. "Julian, I need to talk to you about something sensitive," she said. Her voice carried that tone executives use when they're about to drop bombshells. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "Frankly, I'm concerned about Caldwell's direction. That young man at dinner last month. Owen. He seemed to misunderstand our entire business model." I made sympathetic noises while mentally celebrating. "I've been thinking," Victoria continued, "about working directly with the actual experts instead of going through multiple layers of management. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities outside of Caldwell?" The moment I'd been building toward for 8 months. The Keystone client was ready to bypass my employer entirely. "I'm flattered," I said carefully, "but I'm committed to Caldwell." "I understand. But if that ever changes, call me immediately. You're too valuable to be buried in someone else's company." After she hung up, I opened my ledger to the final pages. The countdown calendar showed 18 days remaining. 18 days until I activated the nuclear option. I picked up my pen and wrote, "Victoria Chang, direct offer received." Brighton Partners had been courting me for 6 months. Their CEO, Nathan Cross, took me to lunch quarterly and made increasingly aggressive offers. The most recent one landed in my inbox on June 20th. Executive Director, financial strategy. Salary that was double my current pay. Equity stake. Complete autonomy. I'd been politely deflecting Nathan's offers while building my ledger. But now the ledger was complete. The map was finished. It was time to use it. I called Nathan from my car during lunch. Julian, please tell me you're finally ready to join the grown-ups table. Let's talk, I said. We met that evening at his corner office on the 45th floor of the Hancock Tower. Through the windows, I could see Caldwell's building across the financial district. It looked smaller from up here. Nathan presented the offer formally. Executive Director. 6 figures signing bonus. Partnership track within 2 years. What's the catch? I asked. No catch. We know what you're worth, even if Caldwell doesn't. I signed the contract that night. Start date, July 15th. 2 weeks' notice would bring me exactly to my target date. On the elevator down, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 14 years. Anticipation for Monday morning. My last day at Caldwell was a Friday. I cleaned out my desk methodically, packing 14 years of accumulated belongings into 2 small boxes. My coffee mug with the chip on the handle. The desk plant that had survived 3 office relocations. The business cards from clients who'd become something like friends. The ledger went into my leather satchel. 250 pages of institutional knowledge that would walk out the door with me. At 4 p.m., I submitted my final reports, transferred my active files, and typed my last email from the Caldwell system. Then I walked to Miriam's office to return my badge and laptop. This is really a mistake, Julian, she said, her face pale. You're walking away from everything you've built here. I'm walking towards something better. What about loyalty? What about the team? I almost laughed. After 12 rejections and 14 years of being treated like furniture, she wanted to talk about loyalty. The team will be fine, I said. You've got Owen. You've got Damien. You've got all those rising stars with fresh energy. I placed my badge and laptop on her desk and walked toward the door. Julian, she called after me. When you realize this was a mistake, call me. There might still be a place for you here. I turned back and smiled. I'll keep that in mind. The collapse began the following Monday. I was in my new office at Brighton Partners, 45 floors above the city, when my old phone started buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from former colleagues. The Morrison Industries project had stalled because nobody could access the custom database I'd built. The quarterly compliance reports were 3 days late because the automation scripts only I understood had crashed. Whitmore Financial was asking pointed questions about system reliability. By Wednesday, Owen had submitted his resignation. The pressure of managing accounts he didn't understand had broken him in less than a week. Thursday brought news that 2 more clients were requesting meetings to reassess their relationships with Caldwell. Friday afternoon, Pierce Henderson called me from his law practice. Julian, what did you do over there? The whole Boston financial community is buzzing about Caldwell imploding. I didn't do anything, I said truthfully. I just stopped doing everything. The weekend brought the first lawsuit threat. A client whose project had collapsed without my oversight was demanding compensation for delays. Caldwell's legal team was scrambling to contain the damage. From my Harborview office, I watched the city lights flicker like stars. Somewhere out there, Miriam was probably working late, trying to hold together a company that had been held together by one man's institutional knowledge. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after I'd left Caldwell. Miriam's name glowed on my phone screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Julian. Her voice was barely above a whisper. We need to talk. It's almost midnight, Miriam. I know. I've been working since 6 a.m., trying to fix everything. Julian, we're falling apart. The Morrison project is dead. Whitmore is threatening to leave. 3 more clients have already walked. I said nothing. Owen quit. Damien is overwhelmed. The compliance department is in chaos. We've had to hire 6 external consultants just to keep the lights on. I'm sorry to hear that. Julian, please. I know we made mistakes. I know we should have promoted you years ago, but we need you back. Name your terms. Director level. Senior director. Whatever you want. The words I'd waited 14 years to hear. The validation, the desperation, the admission that I'd been right all along. But sitting in my Brighton Partners office at midnight, looking out at the city I'd helped build, I discovered something unexpected. I didn't want to go back. I appreciate the offer, Miriam. But I'm happy where I am. We're desperate, she said, her voice cracking. The partners are talking about bankruptcy. Please, just meet with us. One meeting. I closed my eyes and saw the ledger in my desk drawer. 250 pages of dependencies and connections that I'd mapped over 8 months of careful planning. I'm sorry, I said, but I've moved on. 6 months later, I opened the morning paper to see Caldwell and Associates listed in the business bankruptcy filings. The company that had rejected me 12 times had finally collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. I was sitting in my corner office at Brighton Partners, the office with my name on the door and windows overlooking Boston Harbor. The black leather ledger sat in my desk drawer, its pages yellowed now, but still readable, still mapping the dependencies that had brought down a company. Victoria Chong had followed me to Brighton, bringing Whitmore Financial's $12 million contract with her. 3 other former Caldwell clients had made the same move. We'd grown from a mid-sized firm to a major player in 18 months. Miriam had called twice more in the past 6 months. Once to beg, once to threaten legal action over stolen trade secrets. Both times, I'd reminded her that knowledge stored in someone's brain wasn't company property. The ledger had served its purpose. It was no longer a weapon, it was a monument. A record of how institutional knowledge, properly mapped and strategically deployed, could reshape an entire industry. They'd rejected me 12 times because they thought I was just Julian, the reliable guy who kept the lights on. They never realized I wasn't just keeping the lights on. I was the power grid. And when I left, I took the blueprints with me. The map would haunt them forever, but not as a curse. As a reminder that the people you underestimate often hold more power than you imagine. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply walking away and letting gravity do the rest.